People are saluto. This one I'm my brother again, Dr. G. So I don't come back now for can do part 2 for this episode 3. Episode 3 where I don't touch them understand the international community. In the last part for this specific series, I don't explain very briefly, just as a means of summary, the things that they sit on the hands of the international community as priorities. Global terrorism, the crisis in the Middle East, the expansionism of Russia in Ukraine and Crimea, conflict in the DRC just from an African perspective, China's economic expansionism and its implication for future global war order. There's unrest within the France-Afrique configuration. There's British exit and American domestic challenges and European refugees. Now, I explain all of this one to make you understand, say, international community get a very full agenda at the moment. For any of these things then, so if any of these things that will be treated both from the perspective of how it affects the actors within the international system as a priority, and both from the perspective of the humanitarian cost of each of these other circumstances, specifically the questions of conflict. If you see the conflict in Syria at the moment, you know, the conflict in Syria, the conflict in the DRC, the unrest in the Middle East, there are lots of all these other conflicts that are having huge humanitarian costs in terms of loss of life. That stands to be a substance for bigger concerns for the international community. The only point I'm making is that as much as there are abuses of human rights within the Amazonian conflict at the moment, when our numbers are put side by side, the numbers that are coming from the rest of the world, it does not automatically cause our conflict to rise to the top list of priorities of the international system. Which essentially means that the bulk or the reality of the change that we will be able to get, the kind of society we'll be able to construct outside of this conflict, is not going to so much depend on the international system as it's going to depend on us and our ability to be able to intervene with each other. Let me give you something just as a point of interest from the case study of the South African Liberation Movement. Obviously, we need to understand the South African Liberation Movement, even though we draw a lot of inspiration from them, occur within a very different context from our context. The world was bipolar. It was a Cold War context. It was a clash of civilizations and ideology. So people had money reserves that they were willing to splash around to drive their agenda. Post the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War context, there is much less money running around to support conflicts that at the time were essentially ideological. So that element of liberation, of the liberation movement, it don't lose steam. You don't get Cuba or Russia or China or a communist bloc where it be readily prepared for drop money for Angola, enter Tanzania, splash cash around for be able to contain their ideological expanse of capitalism. You not get American CIA in the same position ready to be able to counter the influence of Russia on the African continent. That possibility, which was a resource possibility, has been taken away. That's number one. Number two, when it comes to the actual nature of the engagement, apartheid be an extremely ideologically oppressive driven system that was easy to find offend across the world, because it was white on black racism, it was white on black oppression, which was common for people to easily find offensive, So in addition to the fact that the fight of apartheid benefit from a predominant global ideological conflict at the time in terms of the context of the Cold War, and in addition to the fact that the actual reality of black oppression find common ground in terms of resistance, the conflicts that are approaching in the current context in 2020 do not share the same characteristics. So you will find that much more difficult for set up a movement where you could be able to come against the nation state. These one are all realities that we will need to come to terms with for being able to organize ourselves effectively. Maybe for take for granted, it has nothing to do with the justice of our cause. It has nothing to do with the merit of our cause. It has nothing to do whether it's historically established. It has nothing to do whether we are there's justice in what we are trying to pursue. We are just pushing this thing in a completely different context. And the readiness of the international community to intervene, for step in for a conflict like our own, the parameters and dynamics, they don't change completely. I want to talk briefly about the various actors and way we fit expect them for intervene in the context in the international community. When we talk about the international community, we are essentially talking about a number of potential actors: United Nations and the Security Council within a multilateral framework, African Union, and the various regional economic communities like your CEMAC, your ECOWAS, and your SADC, influential international actors and players, America, France, China, Russia, UK, influential African countries which typically operate through the regional economic countries, Senegal and Ghana in ECOWAS, of course Nigeria, Cameroon being La République Cameroon being now the big brother within the CEMAC region, and countries like Kenya in the east and of course South Africa in the south. Now, international systems don't move from, particularly from an African perspective, from the doctrine of non-interference. Following the establishment of the OAU, one of the things that we happened during the year of independence, I said the creation of nation states create a very strong preservation, a strong understanding between African states for protect themselves against external interference from the rest of the world. I'm not going to explain too much about that one, but the relationship of nation states in Africa, they don't evolve with that principle. Say you scratch my back, I scratch my back. You look that side, why I do it for my country, no put your mob there. Now, Africa functioned with that doctrine of non-interference from 1963 to 2000 for a period of almost 40 odd years after the formation of the OAU. That doctrine only changed slightly when the transition from the OAU to the AU will be established, where they begin to establish issues around the same period where issues around democracy and human rights began prominent within the development discourse in Africa, with the establishment or the formation of entities like NEPAD Coordinating Agency. Now, only from that stage where human rights gained a sense of prominence and the African doctrine of interference switched from a situation of non-interference to a situation of non-interference to a situation of non-indifference, placing upon people the obligation, or African countries and the rest of the world, to intervene in the case of gross human rights violation. But maybe we'll focus on this African diplomacy for see whether as an actor within the international system will get any expectation, say African countries then fit rightly intervene for resolve this war country. The first challenge we will face is the fact saying, number one, the processes of the designation of commissioners within the African Union system, now almost a list system. So African Union gets like a two-tier system. You get a political leadership where EDB determines, it be made up of 8 commissioners, I think 2 deputy chairs and a chair. I may be mistaken on whether there's 2 deputies or 1 deputy and a chair. Those 10 of them are political appointees. Below them, you get an African Union Commission administration headed by directors. So you get director of trade, you get economic sector, you get a social sector, you get peace and security council, and so on and so forth. Now, those eight commissioners plus the chair and the deputy, now regional appointees. By regional appointees, they follow a system of the rotation of the chairs. It goes from north to south to east to west. And every time it needs to go to a specific region, it goes there by means of the recommendation of the members of that country. So put differently, the current Moussa Faki, who is the chairperson for African Union Commission, now a Chadian that comes from the Central African region. Now, it means that for Moussa Faki to be able to campaign for chairperson of African Union Commission, he needs support for CEMAC region. He needs Cameroonian endorsement, La République du Cameroon. And for him to be able to renew his mandate, he still needs the recommendation of the region and the endorsement of Cameroon. That one make all we understand say, Moussa Faki bites their hand with the city. Cameroon presidency did directly determine whether that guy stay on beyond his first term or he leave. Whether he stay on beyond his first term or he leave. So that one a key component we need to take into consideration. At the moment when I talk for Una, Musa Fakina, the chairperson, the deputy I think comes from Ghana. The commissioner for economic and social affairs, a certain Cameroonian lady. For him to be commissioner for that specific unit, it required a recommendation directly, it required a direct recommendation from the Cameroon government. As I talk for Una, the chairperson of the Pan-African Parliament, of course, Kododan, like Cameroonian. So, for we to get a realistic expectation about African Union intervention for this specific context of our crisis, we need to bear in mind, say all of these people that don't list them, the Commissioner for Social Affairs, the chairperson of the African Union Commission himself, the chairperson of the Pan-African Parliament, these are all political appointees that stand as gatekeepers to protect the interests of the Republic of Cameroon within the African Union system. It means, say, for them to be able to, first of all, put the discussion on the agenda, entertain them to the point where you get an African Union position where it be contrary to the Republic, it stands on the issue. It will require, say, we don't push, it will require the creation of a situation of conflict. The highest organ over the African Union as an entity, now the Assembly of Heads of States. Now the Assembly of Heads of States, they be supported by a technical committee made up of ministers of trade and industry, of economy and finance, and so on and so forth. And then you get the committee of ambassadors who are based in Addis. Now that three-tier structure, they define the agenda of the African Union. It means, say, ambassadors they work together with the Commission to see the day-to-day function of the African Union. They receive priorities from their headquarters, drive those priorities onto African Union agenda. Depending on the sector where it be concerned, the Council of Ministers for that specific sectors, they get an elaborate technical conversations which essentially entail the definition of their priorities. They will share at a minister-to-minister level, say that this is the issue we're dealing with, this is how it is. So essentially, Cameroon, La République de Cameroon will get an opportunity for being able to brief the 54 other member states on the peace and security situation in Cameroon before it makes it up to the Assembly of Heads of States. None of those heads of states would have the balls to take on beer on the Amazonian conflict. None of those ministers will have the balls to take on La République de Cameroon on the Amazonian conflict. None of those commissioners will have the balls to take on our conflict against the wishes of the African Union chairperson. So that space is a space that is extremely locked. And for the function of the international system, I want to make you understand, say not even the United Nations intervene or don't create a culture of intervening in the African continent without the backing of the African Union. Now, why that in the last couple of years we don't get involved in this conflict, even the one time we don't pass this conversation, don't struggle to attend United Nations Security Council, how they call that thing, that unofficial Security Council meeting where they hold them on our issues. The presentation they receive them. We remember what the UK talk for them. I want to focus on the African response. South Africa was a non-permanent member of the Security Council. At the time, it will give Africa the chance to solve African problems. So they get a general disposition within the African continent for frown against intervention from outside of the continent that has not taken African solutions priority. And what to be African solutions? Now this system I just described on Pouna. This structure where you get assemblies of ambassadors based in Addis, Council of Ministers, Council of Head of States, and then the African Union Commission as the operational secretariat. It means that our case need to filter through that system, make them discuss and take position, get an African position that then authorizes anyone outside of Africa, particularly the multilateral system, to intervene. The UN or the UN Security Council to intervene. Now, I need to paint this picture now for suggest impossibility. The importance of understanding the way this thing system functions is so that we should know how to roll out our international diplomacy. I'll give a very practical example. Any person when you pack it back, enter plane, fly, go land for Addis Ababa, the struggle for meet up any of those African Union commissioners. If you need to go meet up any one of those 8 commissioners, if you need to go meet up any one of the ambassadors where they be represented, you are on a touristic trip with the capability of zero influence. If we ship 1,000, 2,000 people and make them go continuously distract for Front African Union Commission, it will not put our matter on the agenda. Because the people who are sitting in the African Union Commission in Addis Ababa, they are technocrats. They derive the mandate from their national capitals. For us to get to a space and a place where we can get the African Union to take a stand on our issue, we need to have friendly African Union member states who are prepared to take on the Republic of Cameroon within the African Union systems. The technocrats are not going to do it. Moussa Faki is not going to do it. It needs to be an African Union member state that then takes on, that has a reason to say that notwithstanding the 36 other secessionist movements that are occurring on the African continent, let us put the Ambazonian question on the agenda. That's what it's going to take. Now, when I paint a picture like this, I want to make all man then realize, say, when we talk about, and of course, if they don't do that, African Union is not going to be able to take a position, and the United Nations will not be able to take a position on our issue. Now, why that will we treat our diplomatic engagement as a by the way, occasional emails here and there, not engaging people, not flying to national capitals and talking to these people, not trying to build friends. For us to be able to build friends, because this is the thing. For any of those entities that will get to a place where they develop the willingness to take on the Republic of Cameroon without risking the creation, of course, by the time the one side will win against the Republic of Cameroon, there must be something in it for them. Nobody just sit and wait up and go and look for a fight to fight. That would be irresponsible. There must be something in it for them. It's either they'll approach the subject from a position of principle, or they'll approach the subject from a position of business interest. We need to now then develop the kind of sophistication that it takes to package our conflict, not from the perspective exclusively of the merit of our case, but to make a business case of why any of these people should step in and make our case on our behalf on the table of the African Union. And for us to be able to make a business case, it's not a cheap thing. It's going to require a lot. We need to know what we have and what we are prepared to offer. So this kind of way would you prosecute African diplomacy like a series of headless chickens who do not seem to completely understand the stakes of what we are dealing with. Now, some of the things that they ever vex me when I see I go begin the rant at some point at the top of social media. Because when you see the way the system be configured, now a fortress. For we to penetrate that system, get to a point where they begin to take our own issue them seriously. It's going to take some damn serious strategic work. Not child's play. And we need to start there with the hope of getting through to the multilateral system. We need to have friends. We need to get on the plane and go and land in capitals and hold secret meetings. We need to be able to dispatch people to go and present our case on our behalf, so that our voice can be heard at the African Union. Even if we do not push them to take an African Union position, let me at least be that the conversation has taken place and there was a division in the ranks of the people. That would then create a space for any external international partners to pick one of the divided parties to say that, okay, you people are not agreed on this subject, let us side with this other party and intervene. In the absence of that, it will keep going to bounce off the UN Security Council and come back. Because the African Union and La République diplomacy is set up in such a way that it's going to block everything. Let me stop this part 2 at this point. I'm going to come to subsequently to part 3 to explain more on the multilateral system. United Nations Security Councils, and bilateral people who typically intervene in situations like our own. I want to ultimately get this conversation to a place where I want to make every person realize, say, if we be serious about the change of the seat, we need to walk the ground. It has to happen. It's domestic. It has to be domestic within the 4 corners of the 10 states of Southern Cameroon, of the 13 counties of Southern Cameroon. Now, for that, we need to work up. And we need to work our relationship with the Republic of Cameroon. We need to be able to understand the operations and the functioning and the stages and the phases in which La République as an entity finds itself to be able to make deliberate policy action in that direction. If we don't do that, we'll complicate our lives. I'm going to come back for the next section. I like this thing with Sharon.